Hello, everybody. My name is John Bogert, and I'm with Payroll Systems. Thanks for joining our webinar today, which is leveraging your time and attendance system to stay compliant with labor laws. I'm the time and attendance manager here at Payroll Systems. We have a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, we have all the attendees muted for the webinar. And we'd like to encourage group discussion utilizing the question or chat feature of the GoToWebinar program. So if you go to the software menu and expand the chat/question section, you'll see that you'll be able to submit questions. So our presentation is going to be, actually, our guest's presentation is going to be in 3 different sections. So unless something critical comes up in the questions, then we're going to try to address questions at the end of each section. At the end of the webinar, we're going to post contact information where you can follow up to get more information and continue the discussion if you have any more questions. We've also posted the presentation as an attachment here in the webinar room. So if you go to your menu, you should be able to find that. You could download that. And we'll also be posting a video of this to our YouTube channel. So if you wouldn't mind forwarding, Laura, to my slide there. There we go. So for those of you, this is me. I've been with Payroll Systems full-time for 15 years, and I'm currently the time and attendance manager. And I'm someone who loves being on the water. So I'm a sailor, an instructor, and I'm a member of the Coast Guard Auxiliary. For those of you who aren't familiar with Payroll Systems, we're a leader in services, payroll, time and attendance tracking, consumer-directed healthcare plan administration, as well as human capital management software platform. And we've been around for over 25 years. We're based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we work with clients from 1 to over 1,000 employees in all 50 states in the United States. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Laura Macaskill. She's our speaker today. She is the Channel Development Manager at SwipeClock. SwipeClock's been in business for 18 years and is a leader in time and attendance and scheduling. Laura works with service bureaus like ours and keeps us up to date on the latest workforce management developments. So thanks, Laura, for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. How are you doing?
Hey, thank you so much for the introduction, John. It's really great to be here and my absolute pleasure. I am going to touch on a few key points of leveraging your time and attendance system to stay compliant with the labor laws. We all know employees are necessary for our business to grow. Employees are also our most expensive asset. Majority of that is payroll, and it's always important to be able to monitor hours, overtime, and wages. One of the hidden dollar signs, though, can be from lack of compliance with certain rules and regulations. Any unexpected fines coming from FLSA, Department of Labor, meal premiums, and fair scheduling violations. These penalties to you as the employer may not look like a huge number. But repeated violations would definitely be really expensive. So my primary focus today is to talk about 3 of the largest offenders that we've noticed and how you can automate part of the process to improve awareness, maintain compliance, and avoid potential penalties. So 3 points I'd like to cover today will be hours worked and overtime, break and meal tracking, and relatively new, the Fair Work Week. So we'll take a look first at hours worked and overtime. According to the Department of Labor website, a work week is defined as a period of 168 hours during 7 consecutive 24-hour periods. It may begin on any day of the week and at any hour of the day established by the employer. Generally, for the purposes of minimum wage and overtime payment, each work week stands alone. There can be no averaging of 2 or more work weeks. Employee coverage, compliance with wage payment requirements, and the application of most exemptions are determined on a work week basis. So what this tells us is that all employee hours must be reported. Employee hours must be distinguishable between designated work weeks and days. Work weeks and work days must also be outlined for employees. This can be done most effectively by providing an employee self-service portal or time cards to employees for a transparent experience between an employer and its staff. Taking it a step further and requiring time card approvals, for example, can help increase compliance. It provides the employer backup that every one of these points has been effectively communicated and understood by the employee. Overtime, the FLA states that the overtime pay may not be waived, so it's required for employers to produce documentation of hours worked and overtime paid if applicable. So how do you currently track and record hours worked and the type of hours? Aside from federal overtime regulation, many states and even cities have their own regulations. Just one example is California. In California, overtime must be paid after 8 hours in a day and on the 7th day of work. And that's just at time and a half. We switch to double time after 12 hours and after 8 hours on the 7th day of work. California even takes it a step further to have different rules for various industries, like agriculture, for example. And then the other fun part is the blended overtime rate calculation. So it's not necessarily just a case of time and a half and double time, but some states require overtime to be paid at a blended rate to cover employees who do piecework or earn commissions and bonuses. The overtime would need to be calculated when paid to cover these additional items. So are you aware of how these items are currently being tracked in your systems, and how can you ensure the calculations are accurate? One other thing to consider is your timekeeping and data collection software recording this for you. Payroll Systems is actually really great. They do an excellent job at staying on top of the overtime regulations in different areas. Like you said, he does business in all 50 states, so they make it their point to stay on top of all of the regulations for states and even cities. But this would be one great place to stop to see if anyone has any questions so far on any of the hours worked or overtime.
So I don't show any questions on this section, so I think we can continue at this point.
Perfect, thanks, John. Let's take a look at break and meal tracking. Some states and municipalities require meal tracking. California, again, is a great example. The ca.gov site states that with few exceptions, non-exempt employees must take a meal break of not less than 30 minutes by the end of the 5th hour of work. By not providing employees with a full 30-minute break minimum, employers must then pay a full hour meal premium. That's one of those sneaky items that adds to our budgets. A timekeeping system with break tracking capability can produce reports and time card data to show meal punches. So this will not only help you maintain compliance, but also you can retain those records for any future claims. You can accurately track breaks and meals for compliance, whether paid breaks or unpaid meals. So one feature that a timekeeping system could offer would be to configure how much of a 10 to 15 minute break is paid. So if one were to offer 2 15-minute breaks in the day and someone was clocked into their break for 18 minutes, the 15 minutes would be paid and the 3 minutes would not be. Or when does a break become unpaid completely? So somebody's clocked out for their 15-minute break but are gone for 25 or 30 minutes. Does this mean the entire break will go unpaid and consider it a lunch? Just some interesting points to consider for tracking breaks and meals and determining paid or unpaid. Do we have any questions on break or meal tracking?
So I'm not showing any questions at this point. We'll have a time at the end of the presentation as well to ask questions on any of the 3 sections that we're talking about. So people can go ahead and fill in their questions, and we'll come back to these other points if need be.
Of course, fantastic. Okay, let's take a look at the Fair Work Week. Now, the Fair Work Week regulation is fairly new and still being introduced in certain areas of the US. But first, let's ask, what is the Fair Work Week? What do we mean by this? There are specified cities, states, and industries that are now subject to the Fair Work Week initiative, where it states the employee has the right to a predictable work schedule. This requires employers to post a schedule prior to a specified date range to the work week. A schedule must be provided with written notice, which includes handing a paper printout to an employee, posting a schedule in a conspicuous place which is visible to all employees, and communicating electronically, so by text or by email. The Fair Work Week also limits employers from making adjustments or changes to employees' schedules without written communication within a specified number of days of the shift in question, and that ranges from 10 to 14 days, depending on the city and state. If any changes are made to that shift without adequate notification and a specified reason, the employer may be required to pay the employee a nominal amount of wages as well as a fine. So where are we finding that the Fair Work Week is applicable? Right now, the Fair Work Week Act mainly applies to fast food, retail, and restaurant industries, with just a few exceptions. And currently, these rules are active in the state of Oregon, Seattle, Washington, San Francisco and Emeryville, California, New York City, and just across the border in New Jersey, in conjunction with the New York City. So what are some things we can consider when evaluating our compliance with these rules? Employers are required to maintain records of schedules for each employee for 3 years and must be able to make records available to employees upon a reasonable request. So how far out do you schedule? And how close to the shift can you make changes? Are you in a city or market that is penalized for adding or changing a shift inside 10 to 14 days? Also, when a change is made, employees have anywhere from 24 to 72 hours, again, depending on the location, to respond to changes to their employee schedule based on the manager's reason for changing the shift. and also based on the proximity to the shift in question. So how can schedule changes be framed so that employees are choosing to add a shift rather than the business mandating it? For instance, does your company allow employees to swap shifts or request an open shift? And what is your process for that? The Fair Workweek Act does allow for employees to voluntarily pick up open shifts or swaps with coworkers. So if you had the opportunity to move a shift into an open status and an employee volunteers to pick it up, this action would be exempt from the Fair Workweek rule. An employer would not be subject to any violation. The Fair Workweek regulation is to minimize employers changing schedules last minute or after publications, which can negatively impact employees. If a manager makes any changes to a published schedule, there has to be a reason recorded, and penalties are determined based on the reason that the schedule was changed. And we also have to show when notice was provided to the affected employee. And another thing to consider is part of the Fair Workweek rule are some industries also require an employee to have a specified number of hours off duty between two scheduled shifts. So this is widely referred to as clopening. And what this is meant to do is prevent a retail employee, for example, from staying late to throw freight until, say, 2 a.m. and then be expected to open the store again at 7:30 a.m. That's not determined in some states and cities to be a healthy break, so they want to make sure employees are getting a minimum amount of time off. There are fines to an employer if this violation is reported, and a manager needs to be acutely aware of, or a scheduling system needs to be in place to automate an alert to the manager to try to help prevent this possibility. So in closing, I just hope that these few points have helped us to recognize some of the most common compliance violations in our industries and geographic locations. Our common goal today was to raise awareness and encourage each of you to look at what you have in place to help prevent some of these violations or fines. We're all in business really to make money, aren't we? So, not paying for additional fines for honest mistakes is something we definitely want to avoid. So I've used resources, for example, for the federal FLSA site, ca.gov, and various city and state sites who have Fair Workweek in place. But definitely please utilize your resources at payroll systems to clarify any state or local regulations. So thank you, John, for letting me just cover some of these key points. But I'm happy to take some questions.
So we've got a couple of questions that address the section that we just covered, which is the Fair Workweek. Mm-hmm. And the question is, how do I handle sick employees? So maybe you could discuss, like if an employee calls in sick, or how they might use a system to indicate that they're sick on a day when they have a shift, and how that might be handled.
Of course, yes. So obviously there are unforeseen circumstances. We can't plan on someone being sick one day. So the Fair Workweek Act, as you read through it, will address a lot of these issues. So for example, someone calls in sick. What the Fair Workweek states is you can't then call someone and say, you have to work today. What it does is it allows you to put it up in an open shift, or you can call an employee and ask if they're available to come in and cover. And as you make that change, because it does fall within the amount of time required, again, depending on state or city, but because this is happening, for instance, within 24 hours, you would, there's a list of reasons that you can state in the Fair Workweek, so that a report would show a manager, called an employee because of an unforeseen circumstance, someone was sick, couldn't come into work, broke their leg, whatever that happened. And so that It's not meant to penalize an employer as much for finding someone in unexpected situation. Hopefully that helps clarify it a little bit better. The Fair Work Week Act is really put in place to protect employers, so an employer can't say, I know this is what was scheduled and this is what you have your babysitter set for. You're working around school, you're working around another job, but you have to do this or you're fired. So it's really in place to protect the employees, but leaves a lot of space for an employer to say, I had someone call in sick. This is why this employee was willing to come in and work on this day, and that protects you as the employer, and it's a reportable action.
Okay, great. Yeah, so as long as it's framed in the as this shift is available, you can take that shift, if that works for you, and then but it's not mandatory, at least at the point that you start.
Of course.
So you could make it available to, and some systems, including the SwipeClock system, allow you to automate that process. So you don't have to go calling through a phone tree in order to figure out who's available to work a shift.
Correct.
So another question was how can I tell if I'm subject to any of the Fair Work Week rules? And so first of all, that's something that payroll systems looks into and is knowledgeable about. So if you had any questions about that, if you thought you might be subject to it, so if and we could talk about the specific ordinances and laws that are in certain places, but the place to start with that would be to talk to or email your client manager on that. I've got a couple of questions that go back to the previous section, and the first one is, it says, how do we track breaks in the system and have the employees still get paid? So maybe you could explain how that works, at least with the SwipeClock system, and how it might work with others.
Of course, yes. Now I understand that many of our attendees will have, many of you, sorry, will have various timekeeping capabilities. I personally work for SwipeClock, so I can speak to our system. We do have some settings to automate whether a break or a meal is paid. You can choose to select whether it's paid or unpaid, track the time, and configure it appropriately. I don't know if that helps answer the question, but there are settings set, so it's up to you as the employer. What are you offering your employees? Are you offering them a 10-minute, 20-minute, 15-minute paid break at so many intervals? And you can also say, okay, if you work 8 hours, you're entitled to 30 minutes worth of breaks, whether that's 3 10s or 2 15s. So there are many options for customizing the break and meal tracking. But it gives you the option to report it on the time cards and on reports to say, I offered my employees breaks, they were paid for these breaks. The reason they weren't paid for these 3 minutes of their workday is because they were clocked out of a break and we only offer up to this amount of time.
Cool. So yeah, so just to add to that, so we have systems where, regardless of how the employee is recording their time, that we have a physical time clock, a web clock, a mobile app. The employees can specify that they're going into a break and coming back from a break, and on those different devices or options, it's context sensitive as well. So if they start a break, their option is to end a break, not to clock out at the end of the day or things like that. So,
yeah,
so that can all be automated based upon what the employee enters.
Yeah, of course. It eliminates a lot of just the ins and outs on the time cards and gives them names, so we know what the employee intended to do.
So I have another question that goes back to the previous section. What happens if an employee clocks back from lunch at 29 minutes when they're required to take a 30-minute meal break?
So currently, California.gov site addresses this. So if you've told your employee that they're eligible for a 30-minute break and they clock in at 29 minutes, you then, as the employer, if this is reported, if this is picked up, then you will be required to pay that employee a full hour. It's called a meal premium, and will potentially result in, repeat fines and things like this. So what SwipeClock has in place is the ability to, when somebody uses the lunch punch, so not just an in or out punch, not just a break punch, but a meal specifically, then an employee will be clocked out, and when they try to come back at 29 minutes, it will say, no, you need a minimum of 30 minutes, come back in 1 minute. Other than that, I think I apologize. Just another thought. I've worked with a client in California who, until the capability was released, what they would do is have notes specifically printed on time cards to say, I understand that my lunch was less than 30 minutes. My employer provided me more time and I chose to come back early. And there's some verbiage you can use like that on time cards, but would have to be specific for each day that lunch break was less than 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I would encourage people to check out the California Division of Labor website and look at particularly some of the question and answer sections that they have there, and it basically says what you just said, that if you provide the opportunity and the employee is not restricted to staying on site and is not in the employer's control, then the meal premium isn't owed. But that's a great feature that it shows that on the time cards as well. So let's see. Oh, and then so this is a question about the Fair Work Week again. When did it? Do you know when it went into effect? When some of these? I mean, I know it's in various states and various cities, so it's a little hard to answer that question. But these are mostly recent laws and ordinances, right? It's not something that's been in place for a long time.
It's only been in place for the last couple of years. I believe the state of Oregon was the first to take this on. New York City and the surrounding area in New Jersey. That only took effect, I believe, January 30th, 2018. So it is very recent. It's just one that is definitely on our radar because, first of all, we want to make sure that all reasons, for instance, are covered to eliminate these fines. But also, if this were to expand, in New York City, when it went live, I believe it was January 30th, specifically of 2018, they were looking to expand it to the rest of the state potentially by January 2019. So just testing it in the local area.
Okay, and then we have a question about, and it may have been covered already, but it says, how does time and attendance handle blended overtime computations? So do you want to talk about how that's computed, maybe just briefly?
Sure, of course. And surely this is an item that could be handled by payroll as well, but timekeeping specifically with the SwipeClock system, we give employees and employers the ability to record not only hours, but it also, of course, includes the overtime hours. It includes any options for adding bonuses or tips or commissions or miscellaneous items, for instance, that would need to be configured into those calculations. So when you run your report from timekeeping, when it sends to payroll, it's already done the calculation with the time and the additional items, and can immediately be uploaded for payroll.
Great. So this goes back to scheduling. So the person says, as a manager, could I schedule myself for opening shifts? And that's definitely possible. There's so the supervisors in the scheduling module can schedule themselves too. So, correct?
Yes, of course.
And
That's
then,
correct.
let's see. Oh, do you happen to know, so in terms of the break between shifts, do you happen to know off the top of your head what the amount of time is for San Francisco? And if you don't, no
Honestly,
problem. We can look that up, and that could be a follow-up question that you know, the person could email us at the contact email address that's shown on the screen, and we can get them the details. I just wanted to know if you knew off the top of your head.
no, honestly, not off the top of my head. Most locations are requiring a break of at least 8 to 10 hours. So I've been educated on sort of the range, as we do have people using the system within all 50 states, but it's somewhere between the 8 to 10 hour range, depending on the city. So specifically for San Francisco, no, I don't have that answer.
Okay, no problem. So next question here is, let's see here. Oh, so they give an example. So this would be for a California employee. So they work for 6 hours and waive the meal break, which is an option, so that if they work only 6 hours in a defined work day, then they can waive the meal break. The idea being that the employee just wants to get their shift over and then they'll go home for lunch or whatever it might be. But in this example, the person works from home for another hour. Would that be considered a meal violation? And the answer to that is yes, that would be a meal violation. So they can only waive the meal break. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me look at that again, and because I'm just starting to understand what they're asking. So they're home for an hour, and then they work from home for an hour. So yeah, if they're gone from the office for the minimum break time, and then they start working from home, so they're tracking their time, you know, using maybe a web-based clock system, and so in that case, that would not be a violation because they will have received their meal break, and that's as long as they're not in control by the employer during that time. So they can't be expected to work during that time. They can go anywhere. In this case, the employee goes home, but they could stop off on their way home and do other things. And then after that minimum, at least minimum amount, which is 30 minutes in California, then if they resume work, then that would be okay. They would not be in violation of the minimum meal premium. And just going through here, we've got a couple others. So this is another question about the regulations for San Francisco. So I would encourage you to email us at the info@payroll-us.com, or if you're already a Payroll Systems client, you could contact your client manager and ask specifically what the regulations for San Francisco are for the Fair Workweek standards. So we have a question about an employee who normally works 8 hours a day and waives his lunch and works 7 hours straight. So in that case, yeah, you can only waive the meal break up to, if you work up to 6 hours in the defined workday. Once it's 6 hours and 1 minute, then they have to have been given a meal break by the end of the 5th hour that's at least 30 minutes. Okay, so there's a couple other questions, but I think we've covered those they've already been asked and answered. So if that's not the case, definitely feel free to talk to your client manager or email us at the email address on the screen, the info@payroll-us.com. And so thanks, Laura, for taking the time to give us that great information on these different topics.
Thank you so much, John, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. So that concludes the webinar. Thanks everybody who joined. We've had the contact information up there on the screen for a little bit. So, but like I said, there's the phone number there. You could contact us on that number, or you can call your client manager directly, or send them an email, or you can send an email to info@payroll-us.com. Also, if you would like a copy of the presentation sent to you via email, you can contact us by one of those two methods and we can send that to you. And just a reminder that we will be posting the recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel. And so you could share that with others if they weren't able to attend today. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you later.